All right, guys, welcome to Terrific Talk. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on the CLNS Media Network. Hope you're all having a great week. I've got another fantastic guest from the NFL world today. He's one of the most recognizable personalities at ESPN. He's currently the co-host of ESPN Radio's morning drive show, Golic and Wingo, and one of the primary figures for ESPN's NFL coverage. He, of course, is Trey Wingo. Trey, welcome to Terrific Talk. How are you?
Good, Tom. Thanks for reaching out. How are you?
I'm doing great. So the power of Twitter, right? I reached out to you on Twitter asking you to come on to give some advice for young people. Here we are. What do you think's the best piece of advice you could give for new hires at ESPN today?
Find the way to find your voice, When I started, there's so many other different ways you can sort of accomplish that goal now than when I got in this business many years ago. And it's interesting because the one thing that's really cool about this profession to me is that there's no, if you want to be a doctor, you know what you have to do. You got to go to college, you got to get good grades, then you got to into med school, then you got to do that, then you got to do a residency. The steps are very laid out. Same thing for a lawyer or someone who wants to be a chemical or structural engineer and all these kind of things.
Yeah.
I can't tell you or any of these young people, well, if you do this, and this, you'll be successful. It is, in a very good way and sometimes a very bad way, a very subjective business. And I know people that will check off all the boxes, do stuff in college, then go get a job somewhere in a small market, then try and work their way up, and they're doing everything that you would list out, and for whatever reason it doesn't work. And then there are people who just somehow run into the right person at the right time and meet someone unbeknowingly of who they are and what they do and impress them with how they carry themselves, and boom, just like that, it happens. And that can be the sort of the wonderful part of it and the frustrating part of the business. But the thing that I would tell most people to understand is there's no checklist to get it right. It's just either going to happen or it isn't.
How are you able to find your own voice? I've heard you talk about just how important it is finding your own voice.
Yeah, for me, it was more of a traditional route. When I went to school and I changed my major 5 times. Okay, I was not like these gung-ho people now. I mean, college for either the better or worse, and for a lot of times it was better, was more of a social experiment for me than it was an academic experiment. But that was on me. There were things that I could have done. I just chose not to do them. So when I graduated from college, the thing I said was, man, I don't ever want to get into broadcasting. This is ridiculous. So I got an office job in Washington, D.C. as an account executive for a PR firm. And, D.C.'s a great place to live, and it was, I had my own office. It was very cool, and I was working on stuff that some people thought would have been great, but I hated it. And that, back in the day, I would end up closing the door in my office and just spend hours reading the sports pages before the internet took over the world.
Yeah.
And just finding, I gotta do this, I gotta try this. So I moved back home to Greenwich, Connecticut in my parents' basement. Literally, I was living in my parents' basement and got a job at NBC as a page, through the Page program. And if you're familiar with that at all, the Page program is very similar to the way it was portrayed on the old TV show 30 Rock. I mean, you wear blue blazers, you give guided tours of the building. Basically, whatever they need you to do, you do, but there's some ancillary benefits. I got to work on the David Letterman show when he was at NBC. I got to work on the Phil Donahue show. I got to work on Saturday Night Live. Wow. And I got to do some other stuff, and I'm like, this is for me. This is what I want to do. And so I made a demo tape, much later than most people would. I was almost 25 when I got my first on-air job in Binghamton, New York. I was there for 2 years, got fired from the worst TV station in America. Trust me, it was the worst TV station in America. And then got a job in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where I was not only the local sports anchor, but I got to do Lehigh University basketball and football play-by-play, which was fun. And I was there for less than a year, and I got a call to go to St. Louis, Missouri. And, St. Louis was a top 20, 25 market at the time, and that was really fun. And then I was there for 6 years, and then one day I came in from work, and I had a 203 number that they wanted me to call, and I knew that was Connecticut, so I figured it was ESPN, and, 22 years later, here we are.
The rest is history. So it's interesting.
Certainly something. I don't know if it's history.
It's in the record books. I just doing some research on you. It's interesting you didn't kind of know right away you wanted to go in the media, but your dad was the co-founder of People magazine. I didn't know that. It's incredible.
Yeah, it was, and he was a real inspiration. Now, I will say, like, when I went to college, my major was always first I was radio, TV, then I was journalism, then I was broadcast, then I was something else, and then so I did go down that path originally. That was the original plan.
Gotcha.
Then I got sidetracked into just for lack of a better term, having a good time.
Yeah.
And, I changed my major 3 months before I graduated because I needed, if I had stuck with my other major, I would have had to add another lab science. I'm like, well, I'm not sticking around for another semester. So, yeah, but, it was really cool. When I was a kid growing up and we had, like, teacher in-service days when the teachers get the day off and the kids have the day off from school, a lot of times I would go into New York with my dad. And we would, we'd ride the train in together from Greenwich into Grand Central Terminal, and I would go with him to work. And I have vivid memories of when I was a kid. He would give me copy and he said, "Now run this down to somebody else's hall." And they had these long hallways in the old Time Life building, which is right across from Radio City Music Hall. It's not the Time Life building anymore, sadly. They had these long hallways, and I would get one of those like office chairs with rollers on them, and I would just fly down the hall back. Pushing myself in the chair, delivering copy. But I always thought my dad had a really cool and interesting job. And in a very sort of unintentional way, I really think he inspired me at a very young age because, he wasn't a banker, he wasn't a lawyer, he wasn't a doctor, he wasn't an accountant. He had a very weird, sort of different, but very interesting way to pay the bills.
Yeah. And
I thought that was very cool. So he absolutely did inspire me, but it took a while for me to get back to that.
You've had the opportunity of taking over ESPN's NFL draft coverage from the legendary Chris Berman, more recently taken over from another legend, Mike Greenberg, on the radio show. These are really like big shoes to fill, and you've done it twice. What was your kind of approach to making these big changes work, dealing with all the high expectations that came with it?
Well, the way I've sort of looked at it is I had a job to do, and my like in both cases, whether it was Boom on the NFL side, and especially on the draft, or, Greeny and Golick together all those years, they built a pretty good house.
Yeah.
Like, my job was just not to burn it down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
My job was just not to be the arson blowtorch. And thankfully, on both those sides, that has worked. The draft has turned into this extravaganza, and it's really a lot of fun. And the radio show, I've known Golick forever. He was one of the first ever guys I did NFL Live with when it started back in 2003. We live literally about a mile away from each other.
Wow.
And our kids went up through the same junior football program in the local area here together, and his sons went on to play at Notre Dame. My son went on to play college football at Georgetown. And so we've always sort of been on the same path, the same track, but just never really put together for long periods of time once Mike became the thing that it was, and that took more of his time. So that part of it was, on the radio show, was easy. The relationship with Mike was not an issue. It was just, dealing with getting up at a much earlier time than someone who was a night owl by nature would normally be.
How was that adjustment getting up that early for you?
Well, we're 18 months in, and it still hasn't caught up. I don't know, quite frankly, if it ever will. Literally, it would be much easier for me to stay up till 4 a.m. than it would be to get up at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
So we're working on that. But, if that's the biggest part or problem with my job, I've got it pretty good.
Pretty good. TV versus radio. Is there one you prefer doing over the other? Obviously you love doing both.
They're very different, and they're very much the same in some instances as well. Like for me, at the end of the day, on both of them, it's about storytelling, right? It's about setting the stage, setting the scene. But they are different. Like, for example, in the draft, or doing NFL Live or NFL Primetime, it's my job to sort of set the scene, set the stage, and let the people who are the experts do the work. And my job is to keep the conversation going, put in ancillary points that will put bows or ribbons on conversations and get us moving to the next thing. With radio, it's especially in the morning format, it is very much different in the sense that I am, for lack of a better term, one of those experts, whether people believe it or want to or not,
Yeah.
It's our opinions that matter. So that's the biggest change. Now, or the biggest difference between the two. I think fundamentally telling interesting stories and relating information in an interesting, informational and humorous, hopefully, way when possible is the goal in both of them, but they are drastically different in how you want to do that.
I know you're a big golfer. Who do you like at the U.S. Open coming up at Pebble?
Well, listen, I have said for years I never thought Tiger was going to win another major. I thought he was done. So I had so much joy, and I understand why people didn't. I'm not telling them they should. But for me, he was the most dominant athlete I've ever seen in my broadcasting career, and that includes Michael Jordan. And I know people might shake their heads at that, but Tom, are you a golfer at all?
Yeah, I play.
Okay, you know how ridiculous this game is, right? Like,
yeah.
I just played 2 separate nines today. I played the front nine with a friend of mine, and I couldn't miss. I mean, I couldn't miss.
Nice.
It was unbelievable. So I came back home and did some other stuff, then went back out again, and I couldn't hit a fairway. I mean, I couldn't hit water if I fell out of a boat.
I mean, it's consistency is so hard in golf. That's with me. One day you're driving it well, the next you're not putting it well. It's hard to add it all up together and be that consistent.
Yeah, I've never seen an athlete more dominant in a sport than Tiger was for a long stretch of time in a sport which is impossible to dominate. So, like, for me, when he came back and won the majors, by the way, the first time ever he's come from behind on a Sunday to win a major, the whole thing is, it's just so, if you had presented this script to someone, they would have said, get out of here.
It was amazing.
This isn't going to work. And then to see him, come off and play well Sunday at Memorial, obviously Pebble is where he has it's a long way of me saying, I would not be shocked if Tiger won a second major this year. That being said, if any major right now doesn't start with Brooks Koepka at the start of the conversation, you clearly haven't been watching golf. I mean, he's batting 500 over his last 8 majors. That is a Tiger-like stretch that he's on.
Yeah.
The only difference between Brooks and Tiger is that Tiger wanted to win everything. Brooks really only cares about the Masters or the majors.
Yeah.
I think he has 1 or 2 regular tour wins and 4 majors. Tiger, of course, as we all know, has 81 regular tour wins, which includes 15 majors, and he's 1 away from tying Sammy Snead's record for the most in PGA Tour history. But every time Tiger tees it up, as he said all those years ago, second sucks and third is worst. I mean, that was his philosophy. Brooks is like, I'm just going to amble through these other ones and then found a way to pound you guys into submission at the majors.
Yep. Brooks is tough. It's going to be fun. I'm rooting for Tiger, too. Before I let you go, fun fact about the ESPN campus. What can you tell us?
The greatest single day in the history of ESPN came in 2000 when they built the ESPN cafeteria. And I mean to tell you, that was a big bleeping deal. For like the first few years of ESPN before I got here, there was a McDonald's across the street, and that was the most profitable McDonald's in the United States for several years. There was nothing there, okay? When I first got to ESPN, we had a little room where a guy would bring a cart with wraps. That was it. And I'll never forget standing next to a guy named Mike McQuaid, who has been here since day one, 1979. He's the head of all of our golf production and other things. He's one of the best, most creative, most unbelievable television producers I've ever worked with. He's amazing. He stood there as that cafeteria opened and he had all the opportunities, and he said, this is the single greatest day in the history of ESPN. And 19 years later,
wow.
That's the greatest thing about the campus is the ESPN Cafe.
What's the best food in the cafe?
Well, I'm a breakfast guy all the time, so literally you can get breakfast whenever you want, And they also have, Tom, we're very progressive. We have those Impossible burgers that are made from plant, and I'm telling you, they taste like a burger.
Everybody says this.
Impossible burger. You've got to try it. We have them on the ESPN Cafe.
Wow. That is good to know. Everyone says
also,
they taste just like the regular.
Sushi Mondays are also very good.
Sushi Mondays at ESPN. Nice. All right. Good to know. Thank you, Trey.
You got it, man.
All right. This was perfect. Everybody, go check out Trey on ESPN. He's the best. Trey, thank you again.
Tom, no worries, man. Happy to do it. Best.
Well, it's terrific talk. My name is Tom Anderson. Tom Anderson.
Back to him, back to game, gone. Back, gone. Tom
Anderson.
Great cash, homie.
I feel ready to go another 9 innings.
Touchdown.
I feel ready to go another 9 innings.
Touchdown.
Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
Sound going crazy.
Terrific Talk Podcast. Welcome back, Terrific Talk Podcast.
Here comes the host.
I'm your host, Tom Anderson.
First, behind the bag. It gets through Buckner. Here comes Knight, and the Knicks win it. Back. I don't believe I will score.